My name is Landon Pierce. I'm 26. And until last Friday night, I believe humiliation always announced itself loudly. Raised voices, sharp words, obvious cruelty. I was wrong. Sometimes it arrives dressed as laughter, casual, easy, passed around a table like a shared joke everyone agrees is harmless. Except the person it's about. I'd been dating Evan for 3 months. We met through mutual friends, the kind of introduction that feels pre-approved, like you're already expected to work. We clicked quickly. Easy conversations, comfortable silences. He was attentive in a quiet way, remembered my coffee order, texted when he said he would, listened more than he talked. He worked in marketing at a mid-sized SaaS company. A solid job, a place he seemed proud of. I never corrected his assumptions about my work. When he asked what I did, I told him I was self-employed, business consulting, development projects. He nodded, filled in the blanks himself. I could see it in his eyes. Freelance, flexible, probably bouncing between contracts. It didn't bother me. We were new, light, still learning each other's rhythms. And my actual job? It's not exactly a first date topic. I buy companies, struggling ones. I restructure them. I fix what's broken, or I shut it down if it can't be fixed. There are non-disclosure agreements for everything. Confidentiality clauses stacked on top of each other. When a deal is in progress, silence isn't optional. It's survival. So I kept it vague. Last Friday, Evan invited me to his company's recognition night. Big deal. Formal venue, open bar, awards. He said he wanted to introduce me properly to his colleagues. His tone made it sound like a milestone, like this mattered. I said yes. I wore a formal black outfit. Simple, clean lines, nothing flashy. I arrived at 7 sharp, walked into a ballroom filled with soft lighting and corporate optimism. The night started well. Handshakes, polite smiles, names I'd forget by morning. It was the usual networking choreography, compliments that didn't mean much, laughter that came half a second too late. Then we reached his table. That's where I met Brenda. She was the sales lead, mid-40s, confident posture, the kind of presence that fills space without asking permission. Her handshake was firm and just a beat too long. She smiled like she was already bored. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair, "what do you do?" I gave my practiced answer. Business development consulting. Independent. Her expression shifted instantly, like a curtain dropping. "Oh," she said, "independent." The word lingered. "So, freelancing? You could say that." She glanced at Evan. "Freelancing," she repeated, louder this time. "Is that what we're calling unemployed now?" A couple of people laughed, not loudly, just enough. I smiled, kept my voice even. "I'm employed. I just work for myself." Brenda wasn't done. "Doing what, exactly?" She tilted her head. "Websites? Online shops? One of those people who says they're an entrepreneur but mostly just refreshes their inbox?" More laughter, this time less polite. I took a sip of my drink. Evan's hand brushed my arm. "Hey," he said softly, smiling. "You don't have to get defensive. She's just joking." Then he turned to the table. "She's very humble about her work," he said. "Sometimes too humble." That line landed harder than anything Brenda had said. It reframed me, shrunk me, made the joke official. From that moment on, the tone shifted. Every question about my work came with a look, knowing, amused, faintly sympathetic. Comments floated across the table like harmless observations. "Must be nice, having no real schedule. I bet flexibility is great when someone else is paying the rent." "Evan likes a woman he can manage," Brenda added lightly. "Keeps things simple." Evan laughed. Not cruelly, not maliciously, just enough to show he was part of it. I stayed quiet. When I didn't join in, Evan leaned over and whispered that I should loosen up, that it was just office banter, that I was taking it too seriously. Dessert came out. The room buzzed louder. Drinks flowed faster. That's when Brenda stood. She raised her glass, voice carrying just far enough for nearby tables to hear. "Real talk," she said, eyes locked on me. "Our company's getting a new CEO tomorrow after the acquisition closes. You should send in your resume. Might be an entry-level spot for you. Could be your big break into corporate life." The table erupted. I smiled, nodded. "I'll think about it." What I didn't say was this. I knew exactly who was taking over their company in the morning. At 10 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from my corporate attorney. "Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. acquisition announcement. You'll address leadership first. Board wants you there by 8:30. I excused myself to the restroom and locked myself in a stall. Sat there longer than necessary. Not because I was upset, but because I needed to breathe through the irony of it all. 3 months of negotiations, due diligence, late nights reviewing financials, cultural red flags meticulously documented. The purchase closed at midnight. By Monday morning, I would own the company that was laughing at me. I returned to the table, stayed another hour, let the jokes keep coming, let Brenda enjoy her performance. Evan squeezed my hand once, under the table, but never said a word to stop it. We left around midnight. Evan was tipsy, cheerful. "Thanks for being such a good sport," he said at my door. "Brenda can be a lot, but she means well. It's just how things are." I nodded, kissed him goodnight. At home, I checked my email. Acquisition finalized, 11:47 p.m. I didn't sleep. In 5.5 hours, I'd be walking into that building not as someone's girlfriend, but as their CEO. And the man who let them laugh at me would be sitting in the room, unaware. I've learned there are 2 kinds of silence. The first is fear, the second is discipline. What I practice for a living is the second kind. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of what Brenda said, not even because Evan let it happen. I've been underestimated before. That part isn't new. What kept my mind sharp and restless was timing, precision, the quiet alignment of events that don't care about your feelings. At 3:04 a.m., I got out of bed and opened my laptop. The acquisition documents were already finalized, countersigned, archived. Braden and Comey Solutions now belonged to Pierce Holdings, my company. The shell entities, the escrow accounts, the interim board, all of it snapped into place exactly as planned. This deal had been in motion for 4 months, long before Evan and I ever met, long before he told me about his job with the kind of pride people have when they believe the ground beneath them is solid. I didn't target his company because of him. That coincidence still makes me shake my head. I found Braden and Kono the same way I find most opportunities, through numbers that don't match stories. Declining margins disguised as temporary dips, sales figures that looked healthy on paper but collapsed under scrutiny, a revolving door of junior staff, exit interviews that used careful language but repeated the same themes: hostility, favoritism, silence. Silence again. The culture had been flagged early in due diligence. Aggressive sales leadership, marketing teams drifting without accountability, complaints that never quite made it to HR because no one wanted to be the first voice in the room. When I first heard the company's name, it meant nothing to me. When Evan mentioned where he worked, weeks into dating, it registered only as a footnote. I remember thinking, small world, nothing more. Deals are sealed by data, not dating histories. By the time Friday night arrived, the closing was already inevitable, which is why I didn't defend myself at that table. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't need to. There's a difference between staying quiet because you're powerless and staying quiet because you're observing. I watched how Brenda controlled the room, how easily people laughed when she aimed her attention at someone else. I watched how Evan responded, not with cruelty, but with avoidance. He smoothed things over, softened the edges, let the joke land, and hoped it would pass. That's the kind of behavior that keeps bad cultures alive. By midnight, the deal closed. By 12:30 a.m., I'd reviewed my calendar for Monday, back-to-back meetings, board alignment, legal, finance, HR. The announcement was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., sharp. I would be walking into that building not as a guest, but as the person responsible for fixing what everyone else had learned to live with. Sunday passed quietly. Evan texted a few times. Mimi's, a casual, still laughing about Brenda last night. I responded politely, non-committal. There are moments when you realize a conversation isn't worth correcting yet. Monday morning, I arrived early, 8:25 a.m. The building looked different when you walk in knowing it's yours. Not in an ownership way, but in a responsibility way. Every flawed process, every nervous employee, every manager who'd learned how to survive instead of lead, those were now mine to address. I met with the board first. Quick alignment, no drama. They knew why they'd brought me in. At 9 on the dot, the leadership team filed into the conference room. Evan was there. So was Brenda. They were chatting, comfortable, unaware. The interim CEO cleared his throat and began the announcement. Corporate language, strategic synergy, transition plans. Then he said my name. I stepped into the room. The shift was immediate. Brenda froze mid-sip, coffee cup suspended inches from her mouth. Evan's face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive. His eyes locked on mine, wide, searching. trying to reconcile two versions of me that no longer fit together. I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't revenge. This was reality arriving on schedule. I introduced myself, outlined the vision, talked about performance, transparency, and culture. I made a point to say this. We're going to build an environment where people are valued for their work and their character, not for how well they align themselves with whoever holds the loudest voice in the room. I didn't look at Brenda when I said it. I didn't need to. The room was silent when I finished. Any questions? I asked. Brenda raised her hand. When did this acquisition start? 4 months ago, I said. Closed Friday night at midnight. I watched her do the math. Watched understanding land. Great, I said. Department heads, expect calendar invites for one-on-ones this week. Meeting adjourned. I walked out. Evan caught up with me in the hallway seconds later. Landon, what the hell? I can't talk right now, I said calmly. I have a meeting with the CFO. You bought my company. I bought a company, I corrected. I didn't know you worked here when the process began. He reached for my arm. I stepped aside. And you didn't think to tell me? I stopped walking. When would you have liked me to mention it? I asked. When you told your colleagues I was too humble about my work? Or when you laughed while they suggested I apply for entry-level positions? He didn't answer. I nodded once and kept moving. This wasn't about Friday night. It was about the choice he made without thinking. And choices, unlike jokes, have consequences. I learned something important that day. Power doesn't announce itself with noise. It arrives quietly and then waits to see who panics. I didn't look back after I left Evan in the hallway, not because I was angry. Anger clouds judgment, and I couldn't afford that. What I felt instead was clarity, the kind that settles in your chest when a puzzle piece finally clicks into place. The CFO meeting ran long, longer than planned, longer than polite, and it needed to. The numbers were worse than the preliminary audit suggested. Not catastrophic, but sloppy. Inflated projections. Revenue recognition pushed just far enough to look clean if you didn't ask too many questions. I ask questions for a living. By the time I left that room, it was almost noon, and my calendar was already bleeding into itself. Legal, HR, ops, one-on-ones starting tomorrow. Culture assessment review, scheduled for Wednesday. The machine was moving, and somewhere in that building, Evan was sitting at his desk, trying to explain to himself how his girlfriend had become his CEO overnight. I didn't reach out. I've found that when someone is truly surprised, they don't need help processing it. Silence forces honesty. Around 2 p.m., I got the first email. Not from Evan, from HR. They'd already pulled the internal culture reports flagged during due diligence. High turnover in sales. Junior staff cycling out every 6 to 9 months. Exit interviews that read like a masterclass in careful wording. Fast-paced environment. Strong personalities. Learning curve. Translation: survive or leave. Brenda's name appeared more than once. Not directly accused, but frequently adjacent. The kind of leader who never quite crosses the line herself, but stands close enough to benefit when others do. Marketing came up too. Underperforming compared to benchmarks. Missed deadlines framed as strategic delays. Vague accountability. Teams described as collaborative, but unable to name who actually made decisions. Evan's department. That night, Evan texted, "Can we talk?" I stared at the message longer than necessary. Then I replied, "I'm in meetings all week with the transition. Let's connect later." It wasn't a lie. He followed up almost immediately. "Are we okay?" That question always comes too late. I didn't answer. Tuesday passed in controlled motion. Introductions, walkthroughs, observations. I watched how people spoke in meetings, who interrupted, who deferred, who stayed silent even when they clearly had something to say. Patterns repeat if you know how to look. Wednesday morning, I asked HR to pull Evan's file. Standard procedure. I review all department heads and senior contributors during acquisitions. Titles don't protect anyone. Relationships don't exempt anyone. That's a rule I set long before this situation ever existed. What I found surprised me. 18 months earlier, Evan had applied to Pierce Holdings. Senior marketing role, strong resume, solid portfolio. He'd made it to final rounds. Then the reference checks came back. Concerns about accountability, about aligning with whoever held influence instead of taking independent positions. A note from HR flagged him as not a culture fit for leadership roles requiring ethical pushback. I'd never seen his application. I don't review individual candidates at that stage, but someone in my organization had already assessed his character and passed. By Wednesday afternoon, the irony was almost poetic. He hadn't failed because he lacked talent. He'd failed because when things got uncomfortable, he chose silence. That evening, Evan texted again. "Please, I need to understand what's happening." I replied this time. "We'll talk. Friday, one-on-one, at the office." There was a pause before his response came through. "At the office?" "Yes." Another pause. "Okay." Thursday morning, I signed the paperwork to terminate Brenda. Not because of Friday night. Because the sales audit uncovered 23 instances of falsified reports, inflated numbers, misrepresented contracts, patterns that went back nearly a year. Security escorted her out at 5:45 p.m. No spectacle, no speech, just accountability. That night, Evan sent a long message, accused me of letting personal feelings influence business decisions, said he expected better from someone who claimed to be professional. I didn't respond. By Friday morning, the building felt different. Lighter. People were careful but relieved. 3 junior sales reps stopped me in the hallway just to say thank you. One of them admitted he'd been planning to quit. Evan's one-on-one was scheduled for 4 p.m. He arrived early, nervous, tried to make small talk. I kept it professional. Asked about his projects, his team, his thoughts on department performance. Then I asked about Friday night. He sighed. "What do you want me to say?" I apologized. "I don't need an apology," I said calmly. "I need to understand why you told me to take the joke when you knew it bothered me." He shifted in his chair. "That's just how it works there," he said. "The culture. You don't push back on people like Brenda without making things harder for yourself. So you chose the easier path." I chose to keep the peace. I nodded once. "Here's the thing about peace," I almost said, but stopped. "Some lessons need time." I leaned forward. "I can work with mistakes," I told him. "I can work with learning curves, but I can't work with someone who knows the right thing to do and chooses not to do it because it's uncomfortable." He stared at me. "This is about us, isn't it?" "This is about culture," I said. "And right now, you're part of the problem I'm trying to fix." I slid the document across the table. A 90-day performance improvement plan. Clear metrics. Leadership expectations. Accountability benchmarks. His face tightened. "You're punishing me. I'm giving you a chance." He stood up without another word. As he walked out, I realized something else. This wasn't about power. It was about pattern. And patterns don't change unless someone finally forces them to. Friday evening bled into Saturday without any clear dividing line. That's the thing about transitions. They don't happen all at once. They seep, quietly. You wake up one day and realize the ground has shifted under your feet, and there's no ceremony to mark it. By Monday, the building felt different. Not calmer, not happier, just alert. People spoke more carefully in meetings. Fewer side glances. Less performative confidence. When I asked questions, answers came slower, more considered. That wasn't fear. It was recalibration. The kind that happens when a system realizes the old shortcuts no longer work. Evan kept his distance. He showed up, did his work, avoided my floor. I noticed the way his teammates watched him. Curious, cautious, unsure which version of him they were supposed to believe now. The boyfriend, or the employee under a microscope. On Tuesday morning, HR sent me a notification. Marketing department, performance review. Summary attached. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat with my coffee and looked out over the city through the glass wall of my office. From up here, everything looks orderly, structured, predictable. Streets in neat lines, buildings where they're supposed to be. It's only when you zoom in that you see the cracks. I opened the file. The numbers weren't catastrophic, but they were telling. Missed benchmarks, delayed campaigns framed as strategic pivots, feedback loops that went nowhere, teams described as collaborative but unable to name who actually made decisions. And threaded through it all, avoidance. Not failure, avoidance. The same word kept coming to mind. Later that afternoon, HR followed up with something else. Evan's employment file. Standard, routine, nothing personal. Except for one detail I hadn't expected. 18 months ago, he'd applied to Pierce Holdings. Senior marketing role. Strong credentials. Clean presentation. Confident recommendations. He'd almost made it. The reference checks stopped him. Concerns about integrity. About accountability. About aligning himself with whoever held influence instead of taking an independent stance when things got uncomfortable. The note was brief, professional, final. Talented executor. Not recommended for leadership roles requiring ethical judgment under pressure. I leaned back in my chair and let the air out of my lungs slowly. This wasn't new. Friday night hadn't revealed something sudden or shocking. It had confirmed a pattern. Wednesday evening, Evan texted again. "Can we please talk?" I feel like you're punishing me for something everyone does. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Instead, I wrote tomorrow, 4 p.m., my office. His reply came after a long pause. Okay. Thursday morning, HR briefed me on the broader cultural findings from due diligence. The list was longer than I'd initially realized. Exit interviews going back 18 months. Complaints about hostile leadership. About people staying silent when they witnessed inappropriate behavior. Sales was the loudest offender. Marketing wasn't far behind. One exit interview caught my attention. 7 months old? The employee described watching a marketing manager laugh along while a sales lead belittled a colleague at a company event. No names were mentioned, but the description was uncomfortably familiar. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. At 4 p.m. sharp, Evan walked into my office. He looks smaller here, not physically, but context does that to people. Power reframes space. It forces honesty. He tried to smile, failed. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat. We went through the formalities first. Projects, deliverables, team dynamics. He spoke well, clearly, confidently. He knew his material. Then I closed the folder. Let's talk about Friday night, I said. His shoulders tensed. I told you, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was that bad. You realized? I said evenly. You just chose not to act. That's not fair. Isn't it? He exhaled sharply. You don't understand how it works there. You don't push back on people like Brenda without consequences. So you chose yourself. I chose survival. I nodded slowly. That's the problem, I said. Leaders don't get to choose survival over integrity. His jaw tightened. This is about us, he said. You're letting this bleed into work. I met his eyes. No, work is just where the consequences are visible. I slid another document across the desk. He didn't touch it this time. 90 days, I said. Clear expectations. Leadership under pressure. Accountability in real situations. You'll have support, resources, guidance. And if I don't meet them, then you won't be here. Silence filled the room. You're doing this to make a point, he said finally. I'm doing this because the company needs people who don't look away, I replied, and because you told me, by your actions, that you might not be one of them. He stood abruptly. This is unbelievable. Is it? He left without another word. After the door closed, I sat there longer than necessary, not because I doubted the decision, but because it hurt more than I expected. There's a specific kind of disappointment that comes from realizing someone didn't fail once. They chose the same thing every time. And that choice finally caught up with them. By Thursday, the story inside the building had already started to split. There was the official version: processes, restructuring, alignment, clean language, neutral tone, the kind of narrative companies use to reassure themselves that everything is under control. And then there was the other one, the one people whispered near the elevators, the one that traveled through Slack messages sent too late at night and texts that started with "off the record." That was the version where I was no longer just the new CEO. I was Evan's girlfriend, and Evan was the man on a performance improvement plan. I didn't need to hear it to know it was happening. You develop an ear for these things when you've done this long enough. Culture always reacts before it reforms. It tests the boundaries, looks for weakness. Friday morning, Evan's manager requested a brief check-in. Nothing urgent, she said, just an update. She came into my office with a tablet in her hands and tension in her shoulders. He's struggling, she told me plainly. Not with the technical work. That's fine. It's the leadership expectations. Be specific, I said. She hesitated, then continued. He avoids difficult conversations, defers decisions upward. When asked to push back in meetings, he reframes instead of addressing the issue. He keeps saying he doesn't want to make waves. I nodded. That phrase again. Making waves. We ended the meeting with clear instructions. Document everything. Provide support. Hold the line. That afternoon, I fired Brenda. The timing was deliberate. The audit findings were finalized. The documentation airtight. 23 instances of falsified sales reports, inflated projections, misrepresented contracts, patterns that went back months. Security escorted her out just before 6. No audience, no satisfaction. Just consequence. The building exhaled. People didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Relief doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up in shoulders dropping. In people staying at their desks a little longer without fear. In the quiet return of focus. That night, Evan texted me. You're being unfair. You're letting personal feelings influence business decisions. I expected better from you. I read the message twice. Then I put my phone face down and didn't respond. Saturday morning, I reviewed Evan's PIP metrics again. Leadership scenarios. Accountability checkpoints. Real situations where silence wouldn't be an option. I wasn't setting him up to fail. I was asking him to change. That's harder. By Monday, the pressure was visible. Evan spoke less in meetings, watched more. When conflict arose, he looked to others to take the lead. When asked directly for his opinion, he chose safe language, neutral phrasing, nothing that could be quoted later. It wasn't incompetence. It was instinct. Tuesday afternoon, HR forwarded something they'd found while consolidating the due diligence files. An exit interview from 7 months ago. The employee described witnessing a marketing manager laugh along while a sales leader publicly belittled a colleague at a company event. The manager didn't initiate the behavior, but enabled it through silence. No names, no accusations, just observation. The timestamp matched. I didn't need to ask who it was. Wednesday evening, Evan asked to meet. Not through HR, not through his manager. Directly. We scheduled it for Thursday at 3 p.m. When he came in, he didn't wait for me to invite him to sit. We need to talk, he said. About work or about us? I asked. About us. I leaned back in my chair. There is no us, I said calmly. His face tightened. Because of one stupid night? Because of a pattern, I replied. One I can't ignore anymore. He shook his head. You're defining my entire character based on one moment. No, I said, opening my laptop. I'm defining it based on 3 years of moments. I showed him the file. The reference checks from Pierce Holdings, the HR notes, the exit interviews, the documented instances where he'd been present during misconduct and said nothing. His voice dropped. That's just how corporate environments work. No, I said quietly. That's how toxic environments survive. He stood abruptly. So what, you're going to fire me now? Get it over with? I'm not firing you, I said. You're going to complete your 90 days. You'll meet the standards or you won't. Either way, the outcome will be based on your choices, not mine. He laughed once, sharp, bitter. I thought you were different, he said. But you're just like everyone else once you have power. I met his gaze. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just stopped accepting mediocrity from people who know better. He left without saying goodbye. After the door closed, I didn't move. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Change always costs more than people think, especially when it forces you to choose between who you care about and what you refuse to tolerate. And the hardest part? Knowing you gave them a choice. By the following week, the tension stopped whispering and started to show itself openly. You could feel it in the hallways, in the way conversations cut off when I passed, then resumed a second later with forced normalcy. You could see it in meetings, too. People were careful now, not cautious in a fearful way, but alert, like they were recalibrating what behavior was acceptable and what no longer had a place here. Culture doesn't change when you announce it. It changes when people realize the rules are actually being enforced. Monday morning, my attorney called before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Brenda filed a wrongful termination claim, he said, sounding almost amused. She's alleging retaliation. Says you fired her because of comments she made at a private event. I closed my eyes briefly. And the audit? 23 documented falsifications, going back 8 months, signed off by her. This isn't even close. Good, I said. Send her everything. There was no satisfaction in that, just confirmation. By Tuesday, I met with HR and legal to go through the culture complaints in full, not the summarized version, the raw data, exit interviews, anonymous reports, patterns laid out in black and white. The list was longer than I'd expected. 18 months of junior employees leaving, repeated mentions of intimidation, of inappropriate jokes passed off as banter, of people watching something wrong happen and deciding it wasn't their problem. Sales dominated the complaints. Marketing wasn't innocent. One interview stood out. 7 months old. The employee described a company event where a sales lead targeted someone publicly. The room laughed. A marketing manager joined in. The moment passed. Nothing was reported. The employee wrote one final line before resigning. It wasn't the bullying that made me leave. It was realizing no one would stand up if it happened again. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Wednesday afternoon, Evan's manager stopped by again. She's documenting everything, she said carefully. But I need to be honest with you. He's not improving. In what way? I asked, though I already knew. He avoids conflict. He reframes feedback instead of delivering it. When he's asked to lead difficult conversations, he delays or deflects. He's trying to work around the PIP instead of meeting it. I nodded. Keep going. He keeps saying it's not his place. That phrase again. Not his place. After she left, I stared at my calendar. 63 days left on Evan's PIP. Plenty of time to change. Plenty of time not to. Thursday morning, something unexpected happened. One of the junior sales reps requested a meeting. His name was Jamie. 26, nervous energy, smart eyes. He'd been with the company just over a year. When he sat down, he didn't waste time. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "For what?" "For letting Brenda go." I waited. "She made my life hell," he continued quietly. "Took credit for my deals. Blamed me when her numbers didn't match projections. Told me I'd never make it in sales if I didn't toughen up." He looked down at his hands. "I was planning to quit. I had my resignation letter drafted. I just wanted to see if things would actually change." "And now?" I asked. "I want to stay," he said. "If you'll have me. I know I'm still learning, but I want to try, without someone sabotaging me." I promoted him to interim sales lead that afternoon. It was fast, unconventional. But integrity scales faster than fear. By Friday, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Productivity ticked up. Meetings ended with decisions instead of deferrals. People started speaking, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. Evan watched all of it from the sidelines. He didn't sabotage anything. He didn't cause trouble. He just stayed quiet. The same way he always had. That evening, I found myself alone in my office long after most of the building had emptied. The city lights blinked on one by one outside the windows. I thought about the power I had now. I could have ended this quickly, fired Evan on day one, cited conflict of interest, made it clean, efficient. I didn't. I gave him time, structure, support. Because this was never about punishment. It was about choice. And by staying silent, he was still choosing. The envelope was heavier than it needed to be. Not physically, just enough to register in my hands when Jamie passed it across my desk late Friday afternoon. He didn't sit down right away. Stood there, shifting his weight, like he wasn't sure whether bringing this to me was the right move. "You've got a minute?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "What's going on?" He closed the door behind him. That alone told me this wasn't about sales numbers. "I wasn't sure if I should bring this up," he said. "But after hearing what people are saying about Evan, I think you should see it." I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Not professional, slightly grainy. Printed from a phone maybe, but clear enough that there was no mistaking what it showed. The table from Friday night. Brenda in the center, mid-laugh, arm extended, pointing. Evan beside her, wine glass raised, smiling easily. And me, on the other side of the frame, face neutral, hands folded, posture still. The whole dynamic captured in a single image. Mockery, complicity, silence. I didn't speak. "Where did this come from?" I asked finally. "One of the catering staff," Jamie said. "His name's David. He's worked a bunch of company events over the years. He saw what was happening at your table, and it bothered him." I looked back at the photo. "He said he'd seen Brenda do that before," Jamie continued. "Always picked someone, always turned it into a joke everyone felt pressured to laugh at. He took pictures because he thought someone might need proof someday." "Proof of what?" I asked. "Hostile work environment," Jamie said quietly. That's what he called it. I studied Evan's face in the photo. Not cruel, not malicious, just comfortable. That was the part that hurt the most. "David heard you were the new owner," Jamie added. "He wanted you to have this. Said you handled things with class. Said people with power don't usually choose decency when they could choose payback." I didn't know what to say to that. Jamie cleared his throat. "I was at that table too. Junior guy. Kept my mouth shut. Didn't want to make waves. I watched the whole thing. And what people are saying about you now, that you're on a power trip, it's not true." He paused. "You gave Evan the same chance you gave everyone else. He just didn't take it." After Jamie left, I sat alone with the photograph for a long time. I called my attorney. "Would this have helped with Brenda's claim?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "It wouldn't have hurt. Photo evidence from a company event, witnesses, pattern of behavior, but honestly, you didn't need it. The falsified reports were enough." "So legally, this changes nothing?" "No," he said. "But if you're asking whether it validates your decision-making process, yes, it does." I had HR add the photo to Brenda's termination file anyway. Not out of spite, out of completeness. But the legal angle wasn't what stayed with me. It was the reminder. I could have destroyed Evan. I had the authority, the leverage, the narrative power to make sure he never worked in this industry again. I didn't. I gave him 90 days. Clear standards, support, resources, every opportunity to prove he could lead when it mattered. If he failed, it wouldn't be because I pushed him. It would be because he stayed exactly who he'd always been. The building was quiet when I finally shut down my computer that night. I slipped the photograph back into the envelope and placed it in my desk drawer, not as evidence, but as a reminder. Power doesn't reveal who you are. It just removes the excuses. By Monday, the pressure stopped feeling theoretical. Evan was still there, still showing up, still doing what was asked of him, on paper. Deadlines met, emails answered, meetings attended. Nothing overtly wrong. And yet nothing changed. Leadership doesn't fail loudly. It fails quietly, by omission. On Tuesday, his manager documented another incident. A meeting stalled. Two team members circling the same issue, each waiting for the other to speak first. Evan was asked directly to step in, to make a call, to own the moment. He didn't. He suggested a follow-up, reframed the discussion, deferred the decision upward. The meeting ended exactly where it began. When I read the notes, I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not surprise. Recognition. Wednesday afternoon, Evan requested another meeting, this time through HR. We sat across from each other in a neutral conference room. Glass walls, no history in the space, just fluorescent light and distance. I feel like I'm being set up to fail, he said. You're being asked to lead, I replied. Those aren't the same thing. You want me to challenge people who've been here longer than I have, he said. That's political suicide. It's leadership, I corrected, and it's exactly what this role requires. He leaned back, frustration tightening his jaw. You don't understand how this company works. I understand how it worked, I said calmly. That's why it's changing. Silence stretched between us. People are saying this was personal from the start, he said finally. That you were embarrassed. That you're punishing me. I know what they're saying. That doesn't bother you? It did, I admitted. It doesn't anymore. The meeting ended without resolution. By Friday, HR's documentation was thorough. Not dramatic, not vindictive, just consistent. Avoided accountability. Missed leadership benchmarks. Feedback acknowledged, but not acted on. Evan wasn't failing because he lacked skill. He was failing because, when pressure arrived, he defaulted to the same instinct he always had. Step back, stay neutral, let someone else absorb the impact. That weekend, I revisited the reference notes from years ago, the ones written long before I knew him. Tends to align with whoever holds power in the room rather than what's right. The words hadn't aged. They'd waited. Saturday morning, I called him. Not as his CEO. As someone closing a chapter. We need to end this, I said, completely. There was a pause, then a quiet exhale. I figured, he said. I can't be with someone who holds things like this. I didn't argue. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was holding something. But it wasn't a grudge. It was a boundary. We ended the call without anger, without reconciliation, just an understanding that whatever we thought we were building couldn't survive real pressure. Back at the office the following week, the shift continued. Meetings moved faster, decisions landed, people spoke more freely. Evan was still there, still quiet, still careful, still choosing not to choose. By the time the decision became official, it felt inevitable. Not rushed, not dramatic, just complete. HR scheduled the final review meeting for Thursday morning. External consultant. Documentation reviewed line by line. No shortcuts, no favors. The process mattered, not because Evan deserved special treatment, but because fairness only works when it's consistent. Evan didn't argue this time. He sat across from the consultant, hands folded, posture composed. When the feedback was delivered, missed leadership expectations, avoided accountability, failure to demonstrate independent judgment, he nodded along like he'd already rehearsed the outcome. The meeting ended quietly. 2 weeks' notice, severance per policy, exit interviews scheduled for the following Friday. When he left the room, he didn't look back. That afternoon, the narrative shifted again. Some people accepted the decision without question. Others didn't. A familiar storyline began to circulate, whispered, reshaped, passed from desk to desk. The scorned ex, the CEO abusing her power, the PIP that was never real. I didn't correct it. Anyone who wanted the truth had access to the facts. Anyone who preferred the story was never going to listen anyway. That evening, Jamie stopped by my office. They're talking, he said carefully. I know. It's not everyone, he added quickly. Just some. I know that too. He hesitated, then said, For what it's worth, you gave him every chance. I nodded. So did the company. After he left, I stayed late. The building emptied out floor by floor until only the hum of the HVAC system remained. I pulled the photograph out of my desk drawer one last time. The one from Friday night. I studied it without flinching now, not with anger, not with sadness. With clarity. The woman in the photo looked composed, still, untouched by the noise around her. I realized something then. I could have chosen payback. I could have chosen humiliation. I could have chosen to end everything in a single decisive move. I didn't. I chose process. I chose standards. I chose decency. That choice didn't make me popular, but it made me certain. Friday morning, Evan's exit interview was conducted by an external consultant. By the book. No personal involvement from me. That was intentional. Some boundaries exist for a reason. Later that day, I got a notification. Revenue was up 12% since the transition. Sales projections were holding, this time based on real numbers. 6 internal candidates had applied for the open leadership role in sales, all people who'd been waiting quietly for someone else to step aside. I shut down my laptop and left the office before sunset. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about culture fixes or leadership gaps or transition timelines. I was thinking about something simpler, honesty. The following week, I went on a date. Nothing dramatic. Coffee, a quiet place. He owned a small consulting firm. Smart, grounded, curious without being invasive. He asked what I did for work. I buy companies, I said, and I fix them. He nodded once. That sounds complicated. It is, I agreed. And we moved on. No performance, no assumptions, no shrinking. As I walked back to my car later, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because everything had gone perfectly, but because I hadn't betrayed myself to keep the peace. The office was quieter after Evan left. Not empty, just settled. There's a difference. The kind of quiet that comes after noise has been removed, not after life has drained out. Phones still rang, meetings still happened, deadlines still mattered. But something underneath it all had shifted, like a constant hum finally turned off. Friday afternoon, I received the final HR summary. Evan didn't complete the PIP. The documentation was clean. The conclusion unanimous. 2 weeks' notice. Severance processed. Final paycheck scheduled. References to be factual, not punitive. That last part mattered to me. I wasn't interested in revenge disguised as honesty. By Monday, he was gone. The story didn't disappear with him. It never does. Some people believed the version that cast me as the scorned CEO who couldn't separate work from emotion. Others didn't bother forming an opinion at all. They were too busy enjoying meetings where decisions were made, too busy noticing that feedback was finally acted on, too busy realizing that speaking up no longer carried the same risk it used to. Culture doesn't change because one person leaves. It changes because people stop covering for the behavior that made them want to leave in the first place. The photograph stayed in my drawer. I didn't look at it again. I didn't need to. Jamie grew into his role faster than anyone expected, not because he suddenly became fearless, but because he asked questions, took responsibility, didn't pretend confidence where it didn't exist. Integrity has a way of compounding when it's finally allowed to. 3 more internal candidates applied for leadership roles that month. All people who'd been there longer than Evan. All people who'd learned how to survive under the old system without becoming it. Revenue stabilized, then climbed. Not dramatically, but honestly. 12% growth doesn't sound heroic, it sounds sustainable. And sustainability is where real leadership lives. One evening, long after the building had emptied, I sat alone in my office and thought about what I'd actually gained from all of this. Not the acquisition, not the turnaround. Those were expected. What I gained was clarity about what silence costs, about how easy it is to mistake politeness for goodness, about the kind of partner I'm willing to stand beside and the kind I'm not. I thought about that night at the table, about how quickly people will laugh when someone else is being diminished, about how often the most damaging person in the room isn't the one making the joke, but the one smiling along. Power didn't change me. It just removed the excuse to ignore what I already knew. A few weeks later, Evan's name came up in passing. Someone asked how I felt about it all now. I didn't have a dramatic answer. I said the truth. When someone shows you who they are, especially when it costs them nothing, you should believe them. The company is doing better. Not perfect, not fixed forever, but moving in the right direction. One decision at a time. I closed my laptop that night, turned off the lights, and walked out of the building knowing this. Decency isn't weakness. Boundaries aren't cruelty. And choosing not to look away, especially when you could, is the only kind of power that actually lasts. If you stayed with this story until the end, thank you. Not for the drama, not for the power shift, but because you understood what this story was really about. This was never just a story about a CEO. It was about small moments when someone is diminished, when a line is crossed, when an entire room chooses laughter because it's easier? And more importantly, who speaks up, who stays silent, and who laughs along? Sometimes the most damaging person in the room isn't the one making the joke, but the one who could have stopped it and didn't. If you've ever been in a relationship, a family, or a workplace where you caught yourself thinking, "I'll stay quiet to keep the peace," then this story was for you. Silence is a choice, and every choice has a cost. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. It means you've stopped betraying yourself. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, like, and subscribe to support the channel so we can keep telling stories about truth, choices, and what integrity really costs. See you in the next story.